Here's 5 changes Blizzard made to Mythic Plus dungeons this season, ranked from somewhat cool to truly exciting. Prior to this season, we had a weekly rotation between the Tyrannical and Fortified Affixes, which players never quite liked, to put it mildly. Well, starting this season, Tyrannical and Fortified weeks are a thing of the past. Instead, we're going to have both. Yup. So how this is going to work is that every week, both Tyrannical and Fortified are going to appear as affixes, but they're going to appear at different keystone levels. For the first couple of levels, +2 and +3s, neither of these affixes will be in place, and we'll only have to contend with the new seasonal affix, Xal'atath's Bargain. More on that in a second. From +4 all the way up to +9s, depending on the week, one of the affixes is going to come into play, and once you reach +10s, you guessed it, both affixes are going to come into play each and every week. Now, personally, while I've seen a lot of people being quite enthusiastic about this change, I'm a bit more lukewarm about it, because yes, technically the Tyrannical Fortified split is no more, but that only really is a thing once you reach very high Mythic Plus dungeon levels. For people aiming to get their Keystone Master and then kind of be done and dusted with dungeons for the season, this change is certainly welcome, but not exactly groundbreaking, which is why it's ranked at number 5. Ranked at number 5. Moving on from our discussion of affixes to our discussion of affixes, we have the writer's barely disguised fetish coming into the picture, wreaking havoc in Mythic Plus dungeons. The new seasonal Mythic Plus affix is called Xal'atath's Bargain, and it takes on 4 different flavors depending on the week. And before going all of them in turn, the important common thing about these affixes is that they all follow the so-called Kiss-Curse model, where a certain mechanic is added to the dungeon, and if you do the mechanic correctly, you're going to get a buff. For example, Xal'atath's Bargain Ascendant will periodically summon orbs that empower the dungeon enemies, however, interrupt or dispel these orbs, and you'll instead get a short-lived haste buff. And all the other affixes work in a similar way. The Voidbound affix summons an emissary mob, which if defeated will grant critical strike and cooldown reductions. With Oblivion, you have to capture shattered essences that spawn around the room to boost mastery and leech, for all the good that will do you. And finally, with Devour, you'll have to heal through or dispel a healing absorb shield, kind of cast on all players, in order to buff your health and critical strike. One last thing that's important to note here is that Xal'atath's Bargain affix will appear from the very start with +2 Mythic Plus dungeons, and will stay in play all the way up to +12s. Xal'atath just reverses her bargain and instead just straight up buffs all the enemies and mobs using Xal'atath's Guile. Whoopsie! So now that we know how the Fortified and Tyrannical affixes have changed, as well as how Xal'atath's shenanigans work this season, the natural question is, what about the other affixes? Well, that's right, starting the season, all other affixes you might be familiar with, Raging, Incorporeal, Bolstering, Storming, etc, 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 have all been retired. Instead, the only new affix, besides the one we already chatted about, will be Challenger's Peril, which is a very simple, straightforward affix. All this affix does is that it makes each individual death count as a penalty of 15 seconds rather than the usual 5 seconds in the Mythic Plus timer. Yup. That's all. Very original Blizzard. Pat. So to summarize everything, Raider.io came up with this beautiful chart kind of summarizing the whole affix progression. We start as discussed with the rotating Xal'atath's Bargains before adding in the first of Tyrannical and Fortified. The Challenger's Peril then comes into play at +7. At +10, both Tyrannical and Fortified come into effect. And finally at +12, Xal'atath's Guile will replace Xal'atath's Bargain. Interactive buffs are optional buffs that you can unlock in each dungeon, provided you have a certain profession, race, or class. Out of the 8 dungeons in this season's rotation, 5 of them are going to have specific interactive buffs. In Arakara, City of Echoes, you'll find a few discordant attendants scattered throughout the dungeon. If you kill them and then have a player in your group with Hazelgal Tailoring of at least skill level 25 interact with their corpses, you'll get access to the Skill Thread ability, an additional CC ability that grants you a 10-second stun. Moving on, in the City of Threats, priests, rogues, and Khazalgar engineers of at least skill level 25 can interact with various shade casters, so various shade casters, you know, kind of the hologram thingies of the Spider Queen that you have to sabotage in the campaign. You'll have to interact with these shade casters to obtain stolen power, an HPS, DPS, and movement speed buff, which is great. The only downside here is that you might have to bring a rogue in your Mythic Plus dungeon. Finally, in terms of the new dungeons, we have the Stone Vault, where you can find several anvils containing imbued iron bars. Any warrior, dwarf, or Khazalgar blacksmith of skill level 25, you can kind of see the pattern here, can interact with these for a versatility buff. And in terms of the old dungeons, they're just two things to quickly mention here. For Mists of Turn aside, it used to be that members of the Nightfake Covenant could interact with roots and, you know, kind of stuff throughout the dungeon to get buffs and whatnot. Now, I'm not really 100% sure if this still works, if kind of bringing a member of the Nightfake Covenant, which allows you to interact with these things. This is Shadowlands content after all. However, what we do know is that these buffs can also be accessed now by Night Elves, Tauren, High Mountain Tauren, Druids, and Herbalists. Finally, don't forget the various weapons spread throughout the Necrotic Wake. These are open to anyone and can be basically used to inflict kind of massive damage to all the mobs and bosses in the instance. That can really come in clutch, especially for some pain points in this dungeon. Finally, let's answer the question on everyone's mind: is playing Mythic Plus this season worth it? I swear I've been so snotty these past few days, like it's literally a waterfall there. It's literally a waterfall. For the Q&A part of this video, there are two things I want to address that I really didn't touch on the main bulk of the video. The first one has to do with Mythic Plus difficulty levels. So I didn't touch on this because this is not really a war within change. This is something that happened in Season 4 of Dragonflight, but I do still see some confusion online with people kind of having to be corrected whenever this is brought up. So you have to remember that in Season 4 of Dragonflight, the Mythic Plus dungeons were squished. Basically, all the old levels, kind of from +2 to +9, were eliminated, and the Mythic 0 dungeons that we've been doing last week are actually equivalent to Mythic Plus 10s. So everything onwards, right, like today's +2s, +3s, etc., are actually the old +11s, +12s, and the +10s in today's Mythic Plus are equivalent to +20s. So if you're someone who's kind of coming back to the game after an extended break, don't expect to jump into a +10 and have a breeze like you used to. Bro, those are +20s. They kind of hurt. Okay, and the other thing that I didn't really touch upon in this video, and that's mostly because I already talked about this in a previous video on gearing, has to do with the item levels that drop from Mythic Plus dungeons. On screen right now, you can kind of see a table summarizing the different eye levels that drop from the end of dungeon chest as well as from the Great Vault. I think the important thing to realize here is that if you want to kind of get gear that's competitive with what people get from the Mythic Raid, then you're really gonna need to go all out, because the Mythic track gear only drops from the Great Vault of Mythic Plus dungeons all the way from +10, so basically the old +20s. So if you want heroic gear, then that's going to be easy peasy. All you have to do is kind of do Keystone Master equivalent dungeons. If you want mythic gear, however, you're gonna have to, kind of sweat a bit for it. I hope you found this helpful and that you're going to have, a good time in Mythic Plus dungeons. If there are any questions you want me to answer in future videos, let me know. Stay tuned also, because I have another video coming up and an infographic for it with one tip for each Mythic Plus dungeon boss.